Barak.
Good evening, gentlemen. And we're on Daf Samach Tes. And we're going to go through an entire sugya here, Mitzvah Hashem, just simple pshat. I might recommend, since you have the Masifta, to use the Masifta. So you'll see Samach Tes, and then you'll see a little bays in brackets. Yeah, you have that? And about 7 lines or so down, it'll say there, Ben velo haroy likros av. So what's this all about? A ben sora mora is called a ben. That's what the Torah calls it. And we exclude from that what's called roy lios av. In other words, it's a case of a ben sora mora who already saw shtei saros, so he's now responsible for his actions and guilt crimes for solel v'sove, but there's only a short window of time during which he can still become a ben sora mora and he'll be put to death by skila. And how long of a window is that? And the Gemara suggests that there are 2 ceilings, meaning at 2 different possible points, he becomes excluded from his candidacy as a ben sora mora. One is called Achiyakif HaZokon, and another is what's called Roy Lios Av. What does that mean, Roy Lios Av? So if you take a look at the next line in the Gemara, quoting Rav Kruspidoi, in the name of Rav Shabsai, Kol Yama ben Shel ben Soru More Einon El Shlosha Chadoshim Bilvad. The largest window of time during which he's a candidate to be condemned for death for his criminal solel v'sove is a 3-month period of time. Are there any extra masiftas that we can lend? At home, okay. We'll have to keep one here, and if we're not afraid that it'll be stolen. Okay, then. So Rav Kruspidoi says that the maximum number of time that we give him from the moment he has shtei saras is how many months? 3 months. So the Gemara right away asks for Anan Tanan. Our Mishnah says Mishiyovish shtei saras v'Achiyakif HaZokon, which might mean that Achiyakif HaZokon might be later than 3 months. We don't know. You can't tell me for sure in any situation. You can't set up a sheer, an absolute objective ceiling of 3 months. Maybe it'll be 4 months. Maybe it'll be 5 months. Maybe it'll be less than 3 months. We need, the Mishnah says it's Achiyakif HaZokon. So why are you telling me, Rav Kruspidoi, that it's a sheer of 3 months? And the Gemara answers, Hikiv Zokon. If he has Hikiv Zokon, that automatically takes him out of or terminates his candidacy in that period of time, because he already has Hikiv HaZokon. And that could happen even within 3 months. So let's say after 2 months, from the moment that he had shtei saros, he has Hikiv HaZokon. After that 2-month period of time, he's not going to be condemned for being solel v'sove, because he's already out of the parsha of ben sora mora because of Hikiv HaZokon. But what happens in a case where he did not reach Hikiv HaZokon? That's going to happen much later on. Then it's malu shlosha chadoshim. It's enough that 3 months pass by. So 3 months automatically is mafkia, takes him out of the status of candidacy as a ben sora mora, afgad lo Hikiv HaZokon, even though he didn't reach that stage of physical maturity, but 3 months passed. 3 months, says Rav Kruspidoi, is an absolute automatic mafkia that takes him out of the potential of being a ben sora mora. Let's understand why. Because when 3 months passed, he's roy likros av. Now, what's going on over here? So we have to understand, and we'll see it explain. I'm just giving a sort of an introduction or a little bit of background, but we'll see it soon inside. If, let's say, he reaches maturity of gadlus, which is called shtei saros, and let's say on that very same day that he showed and displayed simoni gadlus, he would have a relationship with a woman. At what point? Now again, since he's already has shtei saros, he may impregnate a woman, but he's still not roy likros av because you need what's called heker. Heker means we have to recognize. It has to be apparent to the eye that he is on his way to becoming an av. Only when it's apparent, when it's visible, only at that point is he called roy likros av. Right? You follow what I'm saying now? So immediately after he had shtei saros, he impregnated a woman. And at what point, says Rav Krispedoi, does he become roy likros av? You wouldn't call him an av just because he had a relationship with this woman. You don't know that he impregnated the woman. You don't know that he's about or roy to become an av until it's nikar. What does nikar mean? Can you help me out here, Rabosai? Right. This is called hukar ha'ubar. So again, if you've never heard of this, you have to write it down. There's no two ways about it. We don't have a whiteboard here. But what I'd write on the whiteboard is hukar ha'ubar, which means that the fetus is already visible. What does that mean? We call it she's showing. At what point does a woman after conception, how many months down the line, what percentage of her pregnancy would have to have passed until the point is that she is hukar ha'ubar and she's showing, as we say in English? Yeah? Is that
3 months?
So that's a 3-month period of time. 3 months is 1/3 of her full term of pregnancy of 9 months. So Yosef Rav Yaakov Minar.
Even if it's a short term,
that's our sugis about a premium. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about, a shorter term. Right now we're dealing with what term? A full 9 months. 1/3 of a 9-month period is 3 months, and after 3 months, if she was in fact pregnant, we would be able to see the ubar she would be showing. That's called hukara ubar. And at that moment in time, says Rav Krispedoi, 3 months after he has shtei saros, he's royally kars av. Again, we don't know for a fact that this young man had such a relationship. But the halacha, the Torah bounces him off, so to speak, excludes him from becoming a ben sorah mora because he's royally kars av. When is the earliest time that he's royally kars av? 3 months after he has shtei saros. Yosef Rabbi Yaakov minar kol kami de Ravina b'Yosef v'kamar mishmei de Rav Huna brei de Rav Yeshua. So let's get the names here. And the names are very important because there's going to be a dialogue back and forth, back and forth. So basically, we don't have to know any names except for the following 2 names. That's all we have to know about, is Rav Huna and Ravina. Why? Because Rav Yaakov, who came from a place called Nar Pkod, he is quoting Rav Huna, and he's quoting Rav Huna in the presence of Ravina. And he's going to derive a major conclusion in his almost, I would say, attack against Rav Krispedoi, having set the 3-month period of time for his candidacy as a ben sorah mora. Shma minomi Rav Krispedoi, who said it that 3 months in the name of Rav Shabsai, that yoledis l'shiva ein ubra nikar l'shlish yomel. If we assume that hukara ubar is always 1/3 of the term of pregnancy until birth, so if she's giving birth at the end of 9 months, I understand that that's 3 months. What happens if she gives birth prematurely at the end of 7 months? So there are 2 ways of understanding it. Either you're going to tell me that, it's always going to be 3 months. And no matter how long her term is, whether it's a shorter one or a regular normal one, it's always 3 months. Or shall we say that no, it's always going to be 1/3 of the term from conception until birth, which means in the case of a woman who gives birth after 7 months, how much is 1/3 of 7 months? So that's 2 months and a third. Can somebody do that very quickly? Again, if you have 7 months and you're dividing 7 months by 3, if I'm not mistaken, you'll end up with 2 1/3. That's 2 1/3 months. That's 2/3 of a month earlier than 3 months. And already on the tzad, whatever the percentage statistically is that she'll give birth after having been impregnated by this young man after 7 months. I don't know what statistical probability there is. Let's call it 20%. I don't know. Okay, Rabbi Osai, you'll look it up in Google. You'll tell me what percent of women give birth prematurely. Let's call it, what number should we give? We'll call it 15%. Does that sound right? 10%? I don't know. 1 out of 10 women give birth prematurely.
The presumption is that when the baby is conceived, it's going to be a 7 month term.
It's going to be what? I didn't hear the end of you said. When the baby is conceived,
it's going to be a 7 month term.
In a preemie case, a 7 month term. That's what we're operating. We're operating with the premise. Okay, let's not get too much. Again, if you get too caught up in the nuances, you'll lose the forest from the trees. Let's deal with 2 situations: 7 months and 9 months. That's it. Chok v'lo yaveh. Those are the 2 possibilities.
It doesn't matter if she can give birth to 7 months. But when you get to 7 months, it's premature, didn't reach where it was supposed to.
Yeah, that's a half.
But it's still gonna show at the same rate whether she gives birth prematurely or not prematurely. It's gonna be.
I don't know. Again,
That's exactly
we have to ask an obstetrician. The Gemara is operating with 2 possibilities. One, again, there are 2 possibilities that the Gemara is operating with. One possibility is your possibility that it always remains standard, always remains set. It's always going to be 3 months. And the other possibility is always a third. That a third of her term, it takes a longer to produce the baby until the baby starts maturing. In the case of 9 months, but it takes a quicker period. She's at the baby, let's say the embryo will develop at a how do you say, a speed up? No, what's the word? At a what?
At a quicker rate.
At a quicker rate, right? A more rapid rate. If she gives birth after 7 months.
That's only if a woman that gives birth 7 months gives birth to a full term like baby. If they gives birth 7 months, it's not developed. It's not based on science.
They're not making themselves.
Correct. Again, but again, even though it's not fully developed, but it's still developing within its potential at a more rapid rate. That's what we don't know. Again, we don't know this. We don't know the answer to this question. You can stand here on your head and debate this from now until Mashiach comes. You'll get nowhere. I promise you. There are 2 possibilities. Either to say, number one, every pregnant woman will only show after 3 months, or every pregnant woman will show after 1/3 of the term until she gives birth. Those are the 2 possibilities the Gemara is working with. You want to rack your heads against your head against the wall? V'vakasha. That you'll do on your own spare time, not on my time. This is my time. Okay, then? Yeah.
My question is, why does he assume Christodai says the third? He didn't say it.
Because he said the kid cannot become a Ben Soromur only after 3
okay.
months. Not after 2 and 3 months.
After the third.
Right.
Well, wait a second. If
The whole thing is
he didn't say that,
maybe no
Spidoni is working with the assumption that it's an
Look at the
absolute
difference.
rule, that it's always 3 months. It's absolute. It'll never be less than
That could
3
also be
months.
for a 7 month term.
Correct. And that's what the Gemara is trying to prove. Shmamina, take a look at the Shmamina inside. Shmamina, where is it? There it is. Shmamina, Midrav Kurs B'doi, Hayoledes L'Shiva, Ein Ubra Nikar L'Shlish Yomel. What we wanted to suggest that it's always relative, and therefore it becomes a third of either 9 or a third of 7, which would bring it down to 2 months and a third. That's not true. Rav Chris Padoy cannot be working with that assumption. The Isal Kedai, if you're going to tell me, that it's always 1/3. Ubra nikar lishlish yamim lama li shlosha. Why are you telling me, Rav Krispedai, that this young man is knocked out of the box as far as his candidacy to be a Ben Sor Morer after 3 months? Betray Vitilsa Sagya. You want to know whether he's royally Kare Av? He's royally Kare Av after 2 1/3 months. Why? Because it's quite possible that he had a relationship with a woman on the very day that he had Shtei Saras. He impregnated her. Let's go through again, this is all a theoretical scenario, but theoretically that could have happened. And then it would already be Hukar Uber, which makes him Roy Leos Av at what point? 2 1/3 months.
It could be a 7-month pregnancy, so it should be.
Which it could be.
So why not consider the possibility? Everything is about potential. If everything is about potential, why do you operate with the assumption that she's going to carry a full term? Why not operate with the assumption that maybe she'll carry only 7 months? In which case, maybe there'd be Hukar Ubar after 2 1/3 months. Now, this Ben Soromor is right here in front of you. You're condemning him to death. Why are you condemning him to death? Because you assume that after 3 months, and it's within 3 months, since he had Shtei Saras, that he becomes royally Osab. I'm going to tell you something else. I'm going to tell you he's already knocked out of becoming a Ben Soromor after 2 months and 1/3. He's already royally Karsav. Why? Because maybe she'll carry only 7 months, and maybe what? Maybe there'll be Hukar Uber after 2 months and 1/3. And now you're judging him for death. So you have one of two choices. Either you're assuming that all women give birth after 9 months, or 99%, or whatever it is. Or you're assuming that there's an absolute rule that no matter, as you said before, that no matter how many months it'll take her to give birth, Hukara Uber always emerges when?
3 months.
After 3 months. Therefore, Shmami No, he says that Rav Huna, could only make sense out of Rav Krispedoi if I assume that there's an absolute 3-month waiting period for Hukar Ubar. Because if not,
Right.
if it's always 1/3 relative to how long she carries, then we should knock him out of the box of Ben Sora Morer after 2 months and 1/3, because theoretically he might be royally Korsan. Amalesa Ravina responds. He writes here to Rav Yaakov, but again, it's really to Rav Huna because Rav Yaakov is quoting Rav Huna. Okay, you're not going to be happy about that. But the Gemara now wants to hold on to that possibility, that
Sure.
position, that it's not a 3-month, absolute 3-month period of Hukar Ubar, but maybe it's relative and it's always a shlish. And if it's a shlish, and there's a possibility that we should consider that maybe she'll carry only 7 months and give more control. Then when is it Hukar Ubar? Everybody help me out over here. After 2 months
point one.
and 1/3. No. And the answer is, but Zil Basaruba. Most women carry to full term.
90%,
90%.
10.5% in America.
What percent in America?
10.5%.
10.5%. By the way, I want to know, again, I don't know if Google will help you on this. If you turn back the clock, if you turn back the clock, Ari, if you turn back the clock to the time of the Gemara, I don't know, intuitively, at least it's possible in my mind that the percentages were greater. I don't know. I don't know what.
Most of them were lived.
We need a physician here to explain to us why a woman would give birth prematurely. What are the factors? What? What are the factors that contribute? Can you look that up? Ask Google what factors cause premature birth? I don't know. And then once you know those factors, like let's say let me just throw out a crazy idea. If there was an obstetrician, he would laugh in my face. Let's say that undernourishment causes a woman to give birth prematurely. Crazy idea. So it could be that back in the time of the
Sex would be the other way sometimes.
maybe it's the other way around. I don't know. But it could be that back in the time of the Gemara, undernourishment was much more common than it is today. I mean, I can tell you what I ate today, my 3 meals. I'm not undernourished. My problem is the opposite. I'm getting fat. COVID hasn't helped much, if you know what I mean. So the Gemara is now applying the principle of role.
Here, I found that. Lack of specific nutrients during pregnancy may influence gestation length and thus the risk of preterm birth.
And increase the chances of what?
Of preterm birth.
Lack of nutrients. I'm not totally crazy. Maybe at the Gemara's time, they didn't take vitamin C, vitamin E, they didn't eat the right foods, you know what I'm saying?
But then we say that the role, it says role came to the term. So back in the days of Waldo, maybe it wasn't 90%, but it was 51%.
Yeah, for sure it was at least 51%. There's no question the Gemara assumes, listen, we're not totally off our rocker over here. Most women will give birth after 9 months, whether it's at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, whether it's the time of Adam Rishon and Chava, or whether it's today. But the question that I'm asking here is, how serious of a possibility statistically is the Gemara is saying rove. I mean, if it's rove of 51%, I don't know. Maybe it's more closer to 90%. And we'll have a whole discussion about that as we go along. But go ahead. What is your name? I'm so sorry. Moshe? Berger.
Is our newest member.
Moshe Berger. The name sounds familiar. Okay, Moshe. Moshe, would you mind standing up if it's not a tear?
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Indication in Mishnah Matir is 8 months, the child, according to the Gemara, the child is considered dead.
Yeah, the Gemara doesn't have, for sure that's not true today. I think an 8-month baby, if I'm not mistaken, today has a better chance than a 7-month baby. At the time of the Gemara, 8 months and you're like a treif almost, But again, let's just, it's very important that we get our bearing here in this sugya, get our heads on. The Gemara is saying there are 2 possibilities here in understanding Rav Krispedai. Initially, the Gemara understood Rav Krispedai as saying that there's an absolute 3-month period of hukar ubar in all cases, from A to Z, straight across the board, without exception, whether she carries to term or she gives birth prematurely. Because otherwise, you're really in a bind here. You're knocking him off from becoming a Ben Soromara only after what? Rav Krispedai 3 months. Why not knock him off after 2 and 3 months? Let's be more compassionate for this young man. We don't want to condemn someone to death. We don't have to. And if we want to be more compassionate, maybe he's not raw. Maybe he's already considered Roy Leos Ish from the time the clock ticks, namely he saw Shtei Saros until 2 and 3 months, because he already may have perhaps possibly impregnated a woman who's going to only carry to a premature birth till the end of 7 months, in which case she's already got ubar 1/3 of the 7 months, which would be 2 and 3 months. Let's knock him out. So we must therefore assume, according to one possibility, and now we'll present the other possibility, which is Ravina's possibility. Says Rav Huna, we must assume that Rav Krispedai is operating with the following premise, that it's always Seres HaKosuf, Chok V'lo Yavor, 3 months, whether she carries the full term or premature. Otherwise, Rav Krispedai makes no sense. Comes along Ravina, and he says, nah, you're making a big mistake. It's always 1/3 of the entire balance of pregnancy until birth. So then you'll ask me, why not knock off the Ben Soromara after 2 and 3 months? The answer is because Hazlinon Basaruba. Because the Torah relies on Rov. So I don't know what Rov we have. We're not sure. In our time, it would be a Rov of 90%. Maybe the time of the Gemara was 51%. I don't know. We don't know. But
How much? Rove is Rove.
oh, Ari, if you again, depending on, oh no, what time is it? Is it 8:10 already? Oh no, I'm in trouble. But if we get enough time, I'm going to try to prove to you that it really, really does make a difference whether it's a 51% row or a 90% row. But again, let's not. I don't want to jump the gun. That's my problem in life. I always jump the gun, and then I end up with not enough time to finish this year. Okay. Says Ravina, yeah, David.
You're killing a kid based on a rope.
Yeah, you're killing a kid based on row. Now, Rabbosai, please make a note of it. We're going to see the Ran, who's going to say that it's an explicit Gemara in Chul and Daf Yud Aleph that we kill a person based on rov. And there's nothing to get excited about over here in terms of Ravina. But before the Ran came along with his erudite scholarship and quoted a Gemara in Chul and Daf Yud Aleph, because we haven't gotten to Chul and Daf Yomi yet, so we don't know what it is in Chul and Daf Yud Aleph. So before that, we were absolutely shocked. Our jaw dropped. How could it be that Ravina is telling us in the perspective of Rav Chris Bedoy that we're going to kill a Ben Sora Morer based on rov? What about Roy Likari Leo's Av? Okay, so it's only going to be Roy Likari's Av in 10% of the chances. But we're dealing with the theoretical possibility, and we're trying to figure out at what point does he cease to be in the Parsha Ben Sora Morer because he's already crossed the boundary and it's Roy Likari's Av. The whole thing of Roy Likari's Av is only a potential. We're not saying that he's a father now or he's going to be a father. We don't even know if he had a relationship and he impregnated a woman. There are like 50 different speakers here that we're piling one on top of the other. Then this reminds me of, I shouldn't mention, this is really dating myself. Anybody ever hear of Mad Magazine?
Does anybody still have them?
Oh man, maybe they're worth something if you have them. Mad Magazine. They used to always make fun of different phrases. They had this, one Madura and Mad Magazine where they would show you that idiomatic phrases make no sense. So they had this thing called "Keep your ears glued to the radio." They show you the ear glued to a radio, or you'll see a person underneath a car, and the guy says to him, "Have an accident?" He says, "No, thanks, I already had one." Have an accident. Anyway, so there's so many sfeikus here. If you're already applying all these sfeikus to knock him out of the box here, because maybe he's a father or he's on the way to becoming a father, then maybe already after 2 months and 1/3, he's already on his way to be a father. Says Ravina, no. The halacha is kovea based on rov. And now the Gemara is going to embark on an entire sugya to try to prove, is this really the case? Do we really kill a person, put someone to death based on rov, without considering that maybe he's from the miut, maybe he belongs to the minority? And the Gemara says, I'll prove to you that this is true. No, first, Fakir. First, the Gemara, I'm sorry, I skipped the whole paragraph in the Gemara. First, the Gemara says they sent this message back to Rav Huna from Ravina, Amru Kame de Rav Huna, Berei de Rabbi Yeshua, that maybe there's another possible way of understanding Rav Chris Bedoy, and my conclusion, I jumped the gun. It's not really true. Maybe it's only in a case of premature birth 2 and 1/3 months. And I came to the conclusion, no, it's got to be absolute, a 3-month period. And now Ravina is saying, no, it's 2 1/3 months, but Azlin and Basaruba, Amalahus, or if Huna sent a message back, Ubedinin Afashas mi Azlin and Basaruba? Is it possible that we're going to kill a person in Bezdin based on Rov, Atorah Amra, Veshaftu E'edav Itziloid? What's the case? It's in Bamidbar Perik Lamed Hey. Reuven kills Shimon. And now Reuven is being tried for murder. And the Torah commands Bezdin to try to discover and establish that maybe he killed Shimon inadvertently. Maybe he was chopping down a tree and the head of the axe flew and hit this guy over the head. It wasn't deliberate. It wasn't intentional. And the Torah says, Vitzilu ha'eda, that the shoftim have to go bend over backwards to try to what? What's Vitzilu ha'eda? To try to exonerate him from a chiyuv misa. Excellent. Exonerate. I needed that word. Thank you so much. To exonerate him and establish that he was a shogeg and not a bezid. Let's take a look. He says it very well here. He says, Hainu Sanhedrin yishpetu v'yadunu ha'im achein hoisa retzicha b'shogeg umutal aleim lechapes kol tzad shel schus. Maybe we can find the schus to come to the conclusion that it was a shogeg. So what's the what's the general direction and the goal of Besdin? To put a person to death? Who remembers the last Mishnah in the first parak of Makos? Do you remember, David? That if you put a person to death within 70 years, that Besdin is called a Besdin. What's it called there? A Besdin.
Murderous court.
At the languages.
Murderous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's it?
I don't know, Raskani, what's that?
Yeah, something along that line, but the Mishnah uses another word there. Okay.
So that's not the end.
Yeah, so if in Ben Sorah Mor you want to look for a schus to try to be matzel him, because that's what the Torah imposes upon the shoftim, then I have a simple way of going. This is Rav Huna's argument against Ravina. Maybe we should consider the possibility, the way you, Ravina, understand that it's always a third of the pregnancy, that maybe he impregnated a woman who's going to give birth prematurely, and therefore he's out of the parsha of Ben Sorah Mor because it's a hukar ubar after 2 1/3 months, and he's already roy likaris av, and that's how we're going to save him, because the Zol of Asove took place in that window between 2 1/3 months and 3 months, during that 2/3 of a month.
Now we know why there's never a Ben Sorah Mor. That in that 2-month period.
Right, or according to Rav Chris Bedoy, within a 3-month period.
Hopefully his parents had a lookalike, they had a sound lookalike.
Okay, then? Yeah, right. They have to speak the same voice and so forth and so on. But in any event, the Gemara says, "V'at amrit zil bas haruba." What an attack! Yeah, my heart goes out for Ravina. You know, Rav Huna was the Gadol Adar, and he says to Ravina, "Are you totally ignorant or unwilling to recognize the pasuk in Chumash, v'shaftu eida v'tzilu eida, because you're going to wave the flag of Rov? You should be waving the flag of Miut."
Well, Ravina fights back.
Yeah, okay, I'm just trying to dramatize.
No, but when Ravina fighting will put it aside. That's what Ravina's thinking.
I'm sorry, say that again.
When you have Kutudak.
Wait, there's so many voices here, I can't hear a single voice. Maybe you don't want me to.
No, put it aside, it's 3 months.
He said 3 months.
It's 3 months.
Ravina is the one introduced the third.
No, Ravina says the design goes off to the road.
Correct.
That's Ravina saying. Ravina is explaining.
No, but there's another way of it. If not for Ravina, if Ravina would have taken Rav Huna's objection seriously, he would have had to come to the conclusion that Rav Huna came to, that Shmamina, that it's always an absolute 3-month period. And we'll send him to Greenville here. You know, it's always a 3-month period. And now Ravina is going to prove that we're going to put to death a person based on Rov. Now, let me give a little bit of introduction. To put a person to death, you need aid. Now, amongst the various regulations and requirements of Eidus, one of them is that they have to answer the question of what date, what calendar date, did this criminal act take place for which we're condemning him to death. If, for example, the Eidim don't know, you know, let's say they claim we saw a murder, but we don't remember when it took place, we throw the Eidus out of court. Bezdin must rely on the Eidim to be kovea the date of the criminal act. So far, so good? Everybody with me? That's introduction number one. Introduction number two, what happens in an event that there's a discrepancy between the two Eidim? That's called hakchosh. Again, I would write this on the white. Hakchosh. Hakchosh is another reason why we disqualify the Eidim. Okay, now we're up to Hakdama number 3. What happens if the discrepancy between the two Eidim is 1 day? For example, one witness says that it took place on the 2nd of Shvat, and the other witness says it took place on the 3rd of Shvat. What would you say, Rabbi? Can we determine the exact date of the crime? Was it the 2nd or was it the 3rd? And the Mishnah is going to establish that in such a case, we accept the Eidim, and we're going to put someone to death based on their testimony because we could be kovea the date. And we have a clear-cut answer to our question, when did this criminal act take place? My high. So the Gemara says that there are two options in terms of the length of every month. What are those two options? Chaser is what? 29, and Mole is 30.
30.
Now, it's not always well known. In fact, it's very rarely well known. The Gemara says it may take 2 weeks until we can get the word out whether the previous month was Chaser or Mole. And that means there's always a margin of error of how much? 1 day. And the Gemara is saying that Rove, in most cases, in 2 witnesses, we can establish that one of those 2 witnesses was mistaken by how much? By a day. And based on that, we have an answer to that question. We could convey this month because we know exactly whether the previous month was Chaser Mole. He didn't know. So again, it could go either way. There's Joe and Larry came to testify. Joe said it happened on the 2nd, and Larry said it happened on the 3rd. Well, Joe knows that let's say it this way. Joe thinks that the previous month was a Mole. So therefore, he sets it up as day number 2 in Shvat. And Larry doesn't know this. He thinks the previous month was a Chaser, therefore he sets it up as day 3 of the month. And the Gemara says that because most people will make a mistake of how much? Of 1 day, because they don't know about the Kfiyas HaChodesh, therefore, given that margin of error, we can reconcile these 2 witnesses and determine exactly on what day of the month the murder took place. And we're going to take this so-called murderer and we're going to put him to death. Says Ravina, we must be relying on Rove. Let's see it inside. Adru's Kame de Ravina. They brought back the answer, the response of Ravuna. Ravuna said to Ravina, how could you put to death a Ben Soru Morer based on Rove? Ravina, how can you say such a thing? State in Pasuk, Hitzilu Aida. Amalei, so Ravina responds, Ubetina Fashas Law is Lina Masaruba. This is a rhetorical question. I'm going to prove to you that we do rely on Rove. Hatnan, what about the Mishnah? At the beginning of Masechet Sanhedrin, it says, Eid Echad Omer, Bishnayim B'chodesh. Eid Echad Omer, V'Echad Omer, Bishlosha B'chodesh. So when did the affair take place? Does Bezdin really know? And the answer is we do know. Eidusam Kayemis, there's no Akhosh in the Eidus. Why? Zeh, one of them, Yodea V'Ibur Shel Chodesh, V'Zeh Eine Yodea. Now, Mesifta fills in the missing blanks here. He says, Bezdin Ibru es HaChodesh HaKodem. Last month was a 30-day month. It was a Mole, what we call a Chodesh Me'ubar. V'Rosh Chodesh HaNochachi Chal B'Yom HaShlosha V'Echad. So when is the first day of the next month? It's day 31. Ulekach Hu Omar Shatarech Shebo Butzah. When did the affair take place? It was on the 2nd of the month. Vizeh, but the other 8, Eini Yodea, he doesn't realize, he's not aware of the fact that Bezdin made the previous month into a Chodesh Me'ubar. And Kevon, this is the punchline. Kevon, you might want to underline this. Kevon Sherov B'nei Adam Toim Be'inyan Zed. Do you see that word rov? Most people will make a mistake. I don't know if he means most people will make a mistake or between 2 people. In most cases, one of the 2 is going to make a mistake. And he thinks that the previous month was a chaser, and therefore he said that the affair took place on the 3rd day of the month. Nimtza, because in fact, what was the status of the previous month? It was not a chaser, but rather was a mole. And really, when did the murder take place? When did the criminal act take place? On the 2nd of the month. Nimtza shein stira b'neihem. There's absolutely no contradiction. And Rav Huna, if you're under the opinion that Lo Amrina and Zil Basaruba, because what? State and Pasuk, everybody, V'hitzilu ha'eda. Nema, why don't we say Hani Dafka Komisadi? Each one of the Eidim are absolutely knowledgeable about the status of the previous month. Both of these Eidim know exactly whether the previous month was Chaser or Mole, and therefore there's what? An irreconcilable contradiction between the Eidim. Don't you realize that there is such a possibility? Okay, you'll tell me it's only a mute, but a mute is a mute. Elolav, it must be Mishum Damrinon, Zil Basaruba, Veruba de Inchi Avidi de Tobi Bura de Archa, Rov Hanoshim Asuyim Litos. It's nice that the Masifta has the word Asuyim. Asuyim means they generally can be. Yeah, I think Asuyim means they can make this mistake. And the Rov people fit into that category. And therefore we can reconcile the two Eidim and put the criminal to death.
Why don't they just all say it?
Say it again.
Why don't they just all say it if they think it's a punishment they also say?
Well, by the time you ask the Eidim, it's already too late because Eidim could only impact Toch Kedei Dibur of their Eidos. Once Toch Kedei Dibur has passed, the time it takes to say Shalom Aleichem Rebbe Umori, which is about 4 seconds, maybe 3 seconds, maybe 2 seconds, the Eidim can't say a word. So there's no possibility of adding, embellishing, or interpreting their Eidos. We have to take the Eidos as it is. And we have to come up with this fantastical conclusion, which the Gemara claims is Rov, and that's Ravina's proof, that we can reconcile the two Eidim and determine when the murder took place based on this Rov. Well, says Ravina to Ravuna, you're in trouble now. You want to tie that what? That we will not kill a person based on Rov. What are you going to do with the Mishnah on Daf Mem in Masechet Sanhedrin? Wow. I mean, Rabbosai, I could, if you close your eyes, you could mamish, they say that a good Rebbe for children, to get young children excited about Gemara, will give them a picture of what went on in the Beis Medrash. There was a lot. It's like when I was a kid, they took me to see a video. They showed a video in class of Mechiras Chametz. It was very interesting. There was a lawyer there, and there was a judge, and it was a whole to-do. They really dramatized how they sold chametz to the guy. These are the things that stick in your memory. This Gemara is a perfect example, if you ask me. You could see what was going on in the Beis Medrash. I mean, Rav Huna was so upset with Ravina. How can you have the chutzpah of saying that according to Rav Chris Bedoy, we're going to put a person to death based on Rov? How could there be such a thing? The Torah says, "Vitzilu ha'eda." What are you crossing out a pasuk? And based on the fact that you're crossing out a pasuk, we're going to put people to death? Karama. Heaven forbid. He comes along, Ravina, and he blows Rav Huna out of the ballpark. And he says to him, what are you talking about? There's an explicit mission that we put people to death based on Rov. And now Ravina is going to bolster his position by quoting another Mishnah in which we again going to see that we put to death someone based on Rov. Now, what I'd like to learn with you tonight is footnote number Yud Zayin. Oh, you don't have?
I didn't bring it.
Oh, but,
It's okay.
so what do we do? Should we take a picture of it quickly?
It's okay.
Okay.
No problem.
Yeah, I was so excited after that we have the Masifta that I don't have to take pictures. No, I'm not. I'm just saying. You understand my hava, you know that everybody has a Masifta.
Possibly carry.
I said, you can actually go on the action.
Okay. Now again, let me give you an introduction to the Ran's problem. The Ran doesn't understand how there could be a whole sugya in Shas in which Ravina and Rav Huna is the Gadol Adar. I mean, I can't begin to tell you what the Gemara says about Rav Huna, are debating whether we could put a person to death based on Rov. Doesn't the Torah say that we put a murderer to death based on Rov? So Reuven takes a sword, again, pardon the very gory description here, and he puts the sword through the heart of Shimon. And there were Eidim Hasra, the whole 9 yards. So what do we do to Reuven? Torah says put him to death. So the Gemara in Chulin on Daf Yud Aleph asks, what do you mean put him to death? Dilma b'makom sayif nekev habi. The Gemara says, baby, exactly where the sword went into his body, he had a hole in that vital organ, and he was about to die. Gemara says from here we derive the conclusion that what? That as lean and basa ruba, that we could kill a person based on rov. And then the Gemara goes on to talk about Makalil of the Imo. How do you know it's his father? So we have a principle called rov bi'ilus achar ba'al. They didn't have genetic testing, so we have to kill a person based on the assumption that this is a father and son relationship. That also is a rov. Frek the Ran, I don't get it. Our sugya is totally oblivious of one of the most famous and fundamental, important sugyas in Shas in Chulin Daf Yud Aleph, where the Gemara. By the way, if you ever look at a sefer called Shem Shmaitit, have you heard of it? Written by the Ksos HaChoshen, the whole sefer is about this Gemara in Chulin. He said Ruben the Lisa, come on, Ruben the Lesson, come on against the Chazaka, supporting a Chazaka. But basically, says the Ran, you see clearly from a pasuk in Chimish that we put a murderer to death based on rov. Because otherwise every murderer would be off the hook. Gershon, are you following me?
Yeah.
I'm trying to raise my voice so you can hear me all the way in the holy city of Jerusalem.
I hear you.
Okay. This is my good friend Gershon Weissman. Anyway, Rabbosai, this is the Ran's Kasha. Let's read it inside. Hiksha Ran. Note number Yud Zayin. The Gemara Chulin Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis Hochichu. The Gemara proves clearly to be the Raisa. The Torah relies on rov, holchem achar rov, and will kill a person. Shariat Torah Amra. The Torah told us Laro Geserotzeach. Afshi Yesh Lachshosh Shema Nirtzach. Maybe the victim Hayatreifa. Maybe at that point where the knife went in. Again, why don't we do an autopsy?
No.
So the Gemara initially says we can't do an autopsy here because the Torah prohibits autopsy. But the Gemara then says no, for the sake of trying to save the life of the Rotzeach, V'itzilu Eda will allow an autopsy. But the Gemara says an autopsy won't help us because maybe exactly where the sword penetrated, that's where the nekev was, and there's no way that an autopsy could determine that. Al Korcha says the Gemara in Chulin. Shall holchem me'atorah acharov im kain eich danu kan hamoraim. How could there be this long-winded, excited diud between Rav Huna on one side and Ravina about the other? Holchem acharov didn't fash so low. Is the Gemara totally oblivious to the sugya in Chulin, which establishes that we derive rov from the fact that the Torah says the Rotzeach has to be put to death? The Valdige Kasha the Ran. Now, what I'd like to do with you tonight,
We're not going to see the text.
what?
We're not going to see the text.
No, I'm just giving you a little introduction. What I want to do with you tonight is offer two answers to the Ran's question. One that Ran offers, and the other one we want to offer ourselves. And then you be the judge and decide which one of the answers you like better. I mean, that's a chutzpah on my part. So let's see the Ran's answer. The Ran says the following. HaGemara Sham Hochicha Shalchem Acharo B'Davar. Here you want to underline it. She'ein efsharus klal levaros. In a situation where there's no possibility of avoiding a rov based on the Torah law, then we have to rely on rov. We have no other possibility. There's no way we could clarify whether he was a treifa. The victim of this murder was a treifa at the time of the murder. No way we could do that. If you're not going to rely on rov, lo tehei metzius, there'll never be a reality, a situation in which we will put the rotzeach to death. The Torah says we do put a murderer to death. Al karchov, we have no choice. There's no possibility of an autopsy or anything that could help us here. We have to assume that most people are healthy, they're walking around on 2 feet, and they're not about to drop dead. But what's the issue here about a ben soru morer? It's not that we're going to have to take a parsha in the Torah and rip it out of the Torah. You know what we could do? And that's Rav Huda's argument. The katzer esmano. Why don't we reduce the time for the candidacy of Ben Sora Mora l'shnei chadoshim u'shlish chodesh to 2 1/3 months? Kedei l'kayim pasuk v'tzilu ha'eda. The Gemara in Chulin, says the Ran, would not solve Rav Huda's problem. Rav Huda is very well aware of the Gemara in Chulin, but the Gemara in Chulin is in a situation where we have no choice. The Torah is saying that we have to rely on Rov. There's no other option. But in this case, says the Ran, to defend Rav Huna, there's another option. We don't have to put to death to Ben Somar based on Rov. Why don't we just say that if he was Zolv his Sove after 2 1/3 months, we won't put him to death? So you have that option. And Ravina is saying no. Ravina is saying we're going to kill him based on. I'll tell you what bothers me about the Ran. And the reason what motivates me to try to find an alternative answer to the Ran's kasha. I'm bothered by the following. Okay, I grant you that there's a difference between the two sugyas and the two cases. But fundamentally, we do see a breakthrough here. That the Torah does rely on Rov to put someone to death. Because the Torah says we put Rotzeach to death. We must be relying on Rov, and there's no other option. So we already have that revolution, that breakthrough, that the Torah relies, HaTorah somechet al Rov, in order to put someone to death. If that be the case, then why is Ravina so upset? Why is he attacking? I'm sorry. Why is Rav Huda so upset? Why is he attacking Ravina? Ravina has a right to say that if the Torah already in one particular case has established, without a shadow of a doubt, that we will put a person to death based on Rov, then why not apply that Rov to the case of Ben Sora Mora? Why are you looking for possibilities beyond the Rov? So in the case of Tzilu Ha'eda, okay, there we're going to say that, you know, we really have to be convinced before we put a person to death that he killed B'mezid and not B'shogeg. So we're going to absolutely investigate all possibilities. And although maybe the circumstances indicate Al Pi Rov that he killed B'mezid, but we haven't established that he killed B'mezid. That's V'tzilu Ha'eda. But if there's a definite Rov, the Torah relies on Rov. So forget about V'tzilu Ha'eda. V'tzilu Ha'eda applies if you don't know whether he did the Ma'aseh HaMachayim, whether he was guilty of a murder in an intentional murder. You don't know? Well, V'tzilu Ha'eda. But if you have a Rov, we've already seen in the breakthrough Sugya and Chulin that the Torah says put a person to death based on. So in that sense, I'm not sure why Rav Huna is so upset with Ravina. In the light of the Sugya and Chulin, he shouldn't be so upset with Ravina. Ravina has already a leg to stand on, 2 legs to stand on, that we rely on Rov and we kill a person.
But then why didn't Ravina use the Gemara in Chulin as the answer against Rav Huna?
That's part of the Ran's kasha.
So the Ran is coming up with an answer that, you know what, Rav Huna would have blown Ravina out of the box had he quoted the Gemara Chulin, and he'd say, well, there's no choice. It's the Efshel Avarer. There's no other possibility of putting to this unless we rely on Rov. But that doesn't prove a thing about Ben Sora Mora. And I don't know why. I don't know why it wouldn't prove. Again, that's just my lack of, I don't know if this is an English word, comfortability. Is there such a word? I invented. Comfort. My wife said blames me for making up new words in English. Anyway, I'm not so comfortable with the Ran. And we suggest another answer to the Ran's kasha. In the case of Ben Sora Mora, how are we doing on the clock? Just give me 5 minutes. All right. And if anyone could stay another 6 or 7 minutes, I'm fine. If not, I'll be both with you. You'll be. In the case of Ben Sora Mora, we're not asking a reality question. We're not asking, well, did this Ben Sora Mora impregnate a woman and it was Hikar and Ibar after 2 1/3 months? That's not the question we're asking. If we were asking that question, then the Sugya in Chulin and our sugi would fit like 2 drops of water. There'll be no difference between the two. We have a dead body, and we know he was a victim of murder. Now we want to know, did he die because he would have died anyway? Would he have died anyway? He's a treif. So the Rove is going to point to this dead body as if we had done an autopsy and determined the mitzius that he was a healthy person. Because people who are walking around on this earth are assumed to be what? Healthy. They're not treifos. Again, nobody's healthy that we know, but at least, we're not suffering from a deathly injury to a vital organ. So that Rove, the Torah relies on. But Rav Huna is not satisfied with that. Because now you're taking it to a whole nother level. You're now setting up standards. The best word I could use is kovea. In other words, there's one halacha called birur. Birur means what b'mitzias happened over here. Was this victim healthy or not healthy? Rove is going to tell you. And Rove is going to paskin on this individual. But now you have a different halacha being kovea. What do I mean being kovea? You want to know what we do in the world of halacha, in legal terms, for every single ben sorah mareh. What standards are we going to use? When are we going to determine that he's royally osish? Royally kariav? And when is he not royally kariav? That's a kvius. You want to be kovea halacha in dinei nefashos based on Rove? That we can't do. Rove has the power to clarify a particular case and a particular reality. That's what do you say? A mitzias in front of us. But now you want to set up standards and be kovea for all of eternity in halachic terms based on Rove that we're going to put together, we're going to put to death the ben sorah morer after, if he's as old as so past 2 1/3 months, as long as before the 3rd month, based on Rove. Who says that you can change the Torah itself and the standards of the Torah for putting someone to death based on Rove? Now you're taking Rove to a whole different level. Does anybody here understand what I'm...
Yeah.
Am I a madman or...
No,
I mentioned that magazine before, now I'm getting really nervous.
Here the Rove is defining something. It's defining the ben sorah mareh. It's defining
Defining
the
halacha.
as royally kariav.
It's not, well, again, I disagree with you only on one little point. I agree with you that we're dealing with definitions. I call it a kfiyus, but it's not about this particular ben sorah mareh. It's about the halachic structure itself. You're not dealing with the mitzias of this ben sorah mareh. And I'll tell you 99% of the chances are that this ben sorah mareh is not royally kariav. But royally kariav is a theoretical definition that's kovea whether he's in the Pasha ben sorah mareh or he's not. Now you want to say, well, we're going to disregard the miut, which may have been 49%. We're going to disregard that, and we're going to put him to death because it's 51% that she would not carry, that she would carry to a full term. Maybe she'll carry prematurely, she'll give birth. So how do you derive? It's a real jump. It's a leap of faith to go from the mitzias Rove to the Rove of kvius, the Rove that's being kovea the standard of halacha in terms of who is roy lios likariah.
We have to apply that to Eidos.
You're always a step ahead of me, Dave. What can I tell you? Well trained. Who's your Rebbe Muvak, by the way? Hard to say. You had a few of them. They're all good guys over there, So since we're in a launch foot, we'll say Rav Livingston. So David asked me, if that be the case, then what did Ravina prove from the case of Eidus, where the Rove is going to tell me that this particular aid made a mistake in one day? We're being kovei mitzius. And therefore, there's no proof. We're back to square one again. Basically, Ravina is quoting the same conceptually, as the Gemara in Chulin, namely that Rove is kovei mitzius. It's a birur. It's going to tell me that this aid made a mistake of one day. So I know we're running out of time, but if you give me 2 minutes, I'm going to try to answer your question, David, and you'll decide whether you accept it or not. We're not talking about this particular aid. We can't be talking about this particular witness. I'll tell you why. Because the halacha is we have to be kofar. Beis Din has to be kofar. What was the exact date on which the criminal act took place? And if the Edom can't convince us of that, if they can't establish for Beis Din what was the date of the crime, then it's like the Edom say we don't know. And if we don't know, we have to throw out the Edom. So now the halacha steps in, and the halacha says the following. We're going to create a margin of error. And that's going to be a new standard of edus. We're going to take this margin of error, which is how long? 1 day. And we're going to establish that any edus within 1 day includes not only that day, but the day before, the day after. We are now doing a kfirus. We're not doing a bira of the Metzius. The Rove is now setting up a standard for edus, such that basically can now determine whether they heard and accepted edus on an exact precise date. And by reconciling the two edim, because we assume one knew about Kiddush HaChodesh and the other Ibrash HaChodesh and the other did not, we are setting up a standard in which the edus is on a 2-day period, so to speak. We're going to expand the edus. When he said day 3 of the month of Shvat, he really meant the day 2 of the month of Shvat, in which we can reconcile it. And now, based on the fact that we know that one aid was aware of what? Of the Chodesh HaIbur, of the Ibur, and the other was not, we can now reconcile the two aidim. So what we're doing now is we're being kovea. What is the halach of Kabbalas Eidus? How does that Kabbalas Eidus work? And within the framework of Kabbalas Eidus, we're being kovea that there's a 1-day margin of error. And we're doing that based on Rove. And as a result, we're going to put someone to death. And therefore, Avina says, I think I have a great proof that not only can we rely on Rove as a beer of the Metzius to determine this particular dead body, but to set up standards of the Torah and be kofei the halacha for all cases in Eidos. A new halacha in Kvias Eidos that when Beis Din is Makabel Eidos, they give a margin of error of 1 day. Okay, then Rabbi Osai, we'll stop here. The real tough part is the next sugya that we have to get to, but thank God I'll have a week to think about it. The Gemara is now going to talk about the Suffolk Islands. Okay then? So thank you so much and have a great week. Go ahead.
I was actually thinking about that, how can I threaten to begin generally roads.
I'll see you again. Bye-bye.